Hi, everyone. And today we have a mental well-being health coach. Would that be correct, Margot, to say? And trainer in business in the business area on our channel.
Hi, Paula. How are you? Lovely to
Mhm.
be here. I'm a mental health and well-being coach and behavioral trainer working with business leaders to help them to self-regulate so that they can stay calm and confident and relaxed in their role. So that's what I do.
Thanks, Margot. That's a much better introduction. Okay, so Margot Fox, you're very welcome to the show. And I know that this is dealing with what I would say difficult people in the workplace from our perspective, getting your perspective on that in as much as possible. I know that your genre is wider in relation to coaching businesses to get the best performance from their team or people skills.
Yeah, I suppose it's essentially what I do as well. I work both with in group settings with teams to help them to be able to manage everything from burnout to building resilience to managing stress to mindset mastery, emotionally regulating themselves, etc. And then I also work on a one-to-one basis coaching business leaders as well. And that can be that can be in relation to a particular issue that they're having, but it also can be in terms of helping them with their own personal development and their own emotional intelligence as well.
Okay, so you generally would work then in the commercial or business sector. So
That's
you go into a workplace, and would you often encounter, say, if you're coaching in a group setting, oh, there's the one difficult person in the office, or that somebody is causing a kind of a circle of problems, or do you get that a lot or not?
well, it's interesting because I'm getting that question a lot more often in the last couple of years, how to actually deal with a difficult person. I run a lot of communications trainings and I'm discovering that people are having challenges with certain types of personalities. And I suppose narcissism does come up as a word that people are using, and it is
Ah.
a bit of a buzzword at the moment. But
Mm.
I think that, our culture is developed in such a way that we are finding a lot of people in the workplace have characteristics of narcissism.
Yeah, and I mean, if you do have one narcissist, I know from our show here, one narcissist in a family dynamic, or even entering a relationship with someone, can cause this ripple effect, and kind of destroy a family dynamic, destroy relationships with people. So when they are in the workplace, if they're at that manipulation and causing problems, I think it could actually affect a company, the performance overall, and actually bring a company down to a certain extent. Have you ever come across it being as problematic as that?
Oh, absolutely. And I suppose, I'd like to differentiate between the fact that, there are people in the workplace who will develop or who will demonstrate characteristics of
Mm,
narcissism,
mm.
but they might not necessarily be diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. So I suppose if I looked at those who have the characteristics and also those who have the diagnosis, it can be challenging on a number of levels. It can be challenging if they are above you in the organization, if they're below you in the organization, and also if they're on your level as well. And it can have a massive impact on your own mental health when you leave the workplace in the evening, for example, and you're thinking about it and you're worrying about it. So it's really, really important on a personal level to know how to manage yourself and to be able to manage the person as well. But then, as you said, in the organization, it has a massive ripple effect because, for example, in a team environment, people will find it very challenging because if there's somebody who's displaying narcissistic tendencies, they can really totally disrupt the team cohesion. It can create siloism. There can be a breakdown in communications. It can create a really bad atmosphere. It can erode trust. And it can actually impact your own level of safety in terms of actually showing up as your authentic self and taking, the healthy risks that you'd like to take in your job, etc., because you begin to lose confidence in your own ability.
Yeah. And I have found coaching one or two people, it's generally in the intimate relationship I would deal with, coaching and coping strategies. But I have had people on that have been really so severely affected by their workplace that it's had an effect on their personal relationships, and they've gone to the doctor looking for antidepressants. It's really been a phenomenally awful experience for them. Okay,
Yeah.
so I think, like you said at the beginning there are three levels. You can have a manager who's very narcissistic and causing problems down the line. You can have somebody, say, in your team on the one level causing you problems, and then you can have somebody who you're trying to manage. Could we possibly go through each of those categories, see what you have to say about it, and I can say what I have to say about it, and we can try and give some value to anyone that's listening here that might find themselves in that unfortunate situation, if that's okay with
Absolutely.
you.
Absolutely. And maybe just to preface it with, for people who aren't very familiar with what narcissistic behaviors are in the workplace and what it looks like, because sometimes I think people can find it difficult to to pinpoint exactly what the problem is with that person.
Yes.
And oftentimes we can actually bring it back to ourselves and say, oh, well, maybe it's actually something to do with me, maybe it's something wrong with me. So maybe firstly saying, these are the type of behaviors that show up in the workplace. So it's things like that need for admiration, that lack of empathy, that, belittling you, the gaslighting, making others, people in the organization feeling less than. It's a lot around black and white thinking. I'm right and you're wrong. So, just to even to know that if
Mm.
you see any of those particular traits, that person is displaying a narcissistic behaviors. So you're not actually imagining it, it is a fact. Um, and then maybe getting into the strategies to be able to deal with somebody in your organization who is displaying those particular behaviors. And the first strategy I would suggest would be setting boundaries. And boundaries are really, really important in our life in general.
Mm.
And they can be the most life-changing thing that we can do. And we need to remember that we teach people how to treat us. And boundaries form a really, really important part of a healthy relationship. But particularly with people you are dealing with who have narcissistic tendencies, boundaries are really, really crucial. So it's being able to say what you need in those situations when you're communicating with a narcissist. It's being able to say no. It's being able to say appropriately what works for you and what doesn't work for you. So if I give you an example of that, let's say, for example, you have a narcissistic boss who is continually asking you to work late all the time. Now, on occasion, obviously, we will all do that. We will all pull out the boat and do what's required. But if you're finding, for example, that your boss is calling you at the weekends, or he's calling you really late at night, or he's calling you really early in the morning on a regular basis,
Mhm.
it's important to be able to put in boundaries. And so that could look something like, my working hours are from 9 to 5, or whatever your working hours are, and I'll come back to you on blank maybe at 9 o'clock in the morning,
Great. Yeah.
whatever, something like that.
Okay.
So you need to try the communication piece first. You need to put the boundary in place first. And if that boundary then is not respected, I think then you have to move to the next stage, which is if you get that email really late at night and your boss is expecting a response, that you don't actually respond until 9 o'clock the following morning.
Perfect. That is a perfect example. And it's a small example, but it is putting in place the fact that you're not going to allow yourself to be basically abused in the workplace.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Actually, I think it's illegal to contact somebody out of hours nowadays with
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
but they
Yeah.
will still do it if they, if they're disrespectful of everything,
Yeah. They don't.
legalities and boundaries. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. As you know, somebody with those tendencies is not, they're above the law. So they don't even,
Yep.
yeah, they
You
do.
know them. You know them.
Yeah, there's not an issue. And
Yeah.
the thing about it is as well is that I think we just have to expect that we're going to meet these type of people in organizations and be prepared for it and have the strategies in place. So yeah, the first one would be setting boundaries. Um, the second one I would suggest then would be giving constructive feedback. So let's say you are in a meeting with your boss who's narcissistic and he is putting you down in a meeting. It's really important that you are very clear and specific when you communicate with them after the meeting. So, for example, saying something like, when we were in the meeting and you said blah, it didn't feel constructive to me. It felt like you were putting me down.
Mhm.
And it would be really helpful in the future if you could give me similar feedback, but it would look like this. And so what you're actually doing there is you're not actually attacking the person. There's nothing personal about this, but you are focusing on the behavior. So you're not saying you did this and you always do
Mm.
that. And you're focusing specifically on the behavior and you're saying, how you felt. And it is okay when you do it in a really, really clear and calm way to say how you felt. But really, really important not to direct it at the person themselves, but at the
Mm.
behavior.
Okay. And what I would say about that is, I think that is a great first approach. If you have a malignant narcissist, someone who has narcissistic personality disorder, no matter how you say it, they will take it as a threat to their control. But I think that has to be an important first point. I think then you'll get a reading on the person, whether they're just narcissistic and they're reasonable and you can work with them, or whether they actually use it against you. And what I would find, if you said that, even in a nice way, to a malignant narcissist, they would then attack you and say, it's not your place to do this, and tell me this. And do you not think that you have a lot of issues and you need to improve yourself? That would be their response. But it would also be telling that you're dealing with somebody who is not going to be reasonable, not going to compromise, or not going to listen to anything that you have to say. So I suppose you could take it from there then. It's a good nearly diagnosis of whether the person is workable with or not.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think, if that occurs, then you've got to put another level of strategy in place. And that could be something around, getting the support from your own colleagues and potentially going to HR at that point. And it is perfectly acceptable to do that if you arrive at the point where you are working where you have established that you're working with a malignant narcissist and it's a very, very toxic environment. I think at that point and you have done everything you can to communicate clearly and to set your boundaries and to be very specific, about your role and what's required of you, that you do actually take that then to HR and you document everything at that point.
That yeah, that's a point that I think is really pertinent in the workplace, because knowing if you are, again, if the person just has narcissistic traits, you'll probably be able to work with them if you take the approach that you were saying, and not to personalize it, and to ask them for their opinion, and working with them and their help and whatever. But I find in a situation where there's a malignant narcissist, you go against them in any way, and even if you go to HR, they will flip the story 100%. So documenting everything, even if you have a conversation with them, it seems very concentrated or over the top. But I find if you have a conversation with them, you document that and you copy somebody else on it, because you need to have proof in some way. Yeah.
Absolutely. And also, I suppose, in those kind of situations as well, it's very, very important when you're communicating with them that you try, in as much as it's extremely difficult, not to get triggered and not to trigger them, and to de-escalate any emotional communication in as much as you can, and remain calm with a low voice, etc. And just try to contain the situation as well, while, obviously, making sure that you have documented the entire conversation. Um, it's, it's not like you're working with a colleague where you can share, parts of your personal life or what's happening in your life. You have to maintain professional distance from somebody like that, because and protect your emotional health, because they will use anything that they have on you to get back at you. And so everything you say and everything you communicate, it has to be really, really thought through beforehand to protect yourself.
Yeah. Not to give away your vulnerable points,
Yes.
because they will use them if they need to.
Yeah, not to be vulnerable with anything in relation to your personal life, and because they just won't respect it, and they will use it as ammunition against you. So, but leaning into trusted colleagues, the support, and HR, and then also, I suppose, building a supportive team around you as well is an important way of mitigating against narcissistic behaviors. You will find that, as you said, you can use all the empathy in the world with people who have narcissistic characteristics, and you can set the boundaries and you can use effective communication. But if it is a malignant narcissist, you really need to bring the big guns in, I
The
think.
big guns, yeah.
Bring the big guns in. Yeah.
Yeah. And even, I suppose, if it's so horrendous and you're the personal target of a malignant narcissist, sometimes the only way is out. I have found, speaking with people, but not everybody has the choice of doing that, leaving the job, looking for another job.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that it will severely affect your mental health and your emotional health as well. And what you do outside of work to get support and to help you to cope is really, really important. So taking care of yourself, eating well, trying to sleep well, all of those things will really, really help you. But in some instances, depending on the how the company in question handles that particular person, it
Yes.
may be you may have a very, very supportive team, you may have a very supportive HR department, but
Mm.
sometimes that's not the case, or sometimes that malignant narcissist is so convincing
Yes.
that you have no other recourse but to leave.
Yeah, totally. Actually, it was very interesting. I was watching a podcast that just came in my feed, earlier this morning, and it was this guy was talking about how to deal with, and I leave the person's name in the description, the video description, but he was talking about how to deal with manipulative people, and he said to first of all know that they're trying to trigger you emotionally, because if they can do that, you're more vulnerable to a manipulation. So he said, if you're dealing with a difficult person, when you're going to respond to them, don't immediately give a reaction. He said, take a minute and take a deep breath and put some distance between you, listen to what they're saying to you, and then basically give it back to them, instead of they're kind of accusing you or they're being passive aggressive. And he said, put it back to them like, so what I'm hearing is you would like me to do this because you are unhappy about something. So it kind of gives it back to them and they have to justify what they're accusing you of. Does that feed into
Absolutely.
the narrative at all? Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely, that's a brilliant way of dealing with it. There's a guy by the name of Viktor Frankl, and he has an expression, and it is between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is the power to choose our response, and in our response is our growth and freedom. So having that space to be able to actually just think before you respond rather than react, because I think in those situations it's very, very easy to be triggered. And
Mm.
when we're triggered, we go into our emotional brain, and then we're like a child with long legs, and we react, we will buy into their narrative, we will feed their urge to trigger us, and then we have lost control. So that's really, really good advice, to just sit back and, take a breath. And you can even say something like, can I just take a minute or two to process what you've just said?
Wow, that's good.
you
Yeah,
know,
good.
and
Yeah,
then you can come up with, then you can throw it back to them,
yeah,
and at least it gives you that chance to move from your emotional brain into your rational brain. And that's
yeah.
actually something that I do. There's an exercise I do in my training. It's a brilliant exercise, and it's called Five Chairs, Five Choices. And it's actually a system that's been developed by a lady by the name of Louise Evans. And it is all about how we are continually triggered in our lives, not only by narcissists, but by people in general, and how we have choice over how we either react or respond to the situation that we're in. And so we have these five chairs, and you move from one chair to the next. And
Brilliant.
it is all about that space. That chair is actually in the middle, and it's that place you go to when you're triggered, where you just breathe and just take a moment. And that can move you out of that reactive state into that state of responding. And that's really, really effective when you're dealing with a narcissist.
Brilliant. That is really useful. That's a really useful tip that somebody could actually go into the workplace tomorrow and implement and see what difference it actually makes.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Okay, so yeah,
understand, I suppose, Paul, as well, that as you said earlier, that once you know that they are looking to trigger you, that, using those techniques are important. And I think the more that you do it, it's like training a muscle. What you're doing is training a brain muscle. And so it takes a little bit of effort, and it takes a little bit of time. So I think being compassionate towards yourself as well, if you try it once and it doesn't quite work, give yourself a bit of compassion and then try again, because you are training a brain muscle. And in the same way as when you go to the gym and you want to get a six pack, you're not going to get the six pack after going to the gym once. So give yourself some compassion as you're learning to implement these techniques.
okay, I hear you. The other thing I actually found interesting was, and I don't know if you've come up against this, but in the workplace, the person who's really talented and very good at their job is often the person that's targeted, because a narcissistic individual will feel threatened by what they perceive is the superiority of that person. So they will do their best to make that person feel incompetent or create a situation around them where other people think that they're incompetent. Have you come across that at all, or how would that play out? Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I have heard of incidences where really competent people in teams have often found, the narcissist, for example, maybe taking ownership of their work.
Yes.
And
Plagiarism. Yeah.
Yeah, and saying, we did this or I did that, or and that can be very, very difficult. And I suppose the reality is that while the narcissist is bullying everybody around him, behind it all, he has very, very low self-esteem.
Mm.
Do you agree?
Yep, I
And
do.
so he's looking at somebody who's very competent at their job, and that person is a threat to him or
Yeah,
her.
yeah.
And so he is going to do everything in his power to bring that person down so that he can build himself up. So that's what's going on in that situation. And I think it all comes back then to clear communication with the person who is being affected by it, that they can actually they can own their own voice and they can say, no, actually, I was involved in that project. I worked on that project, and this is, what I'm delivering.
Mm.
So, you know, tapping into your own internal power and your own voice is
Mm.
is 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 crucial, I think, because otherwise we're playing into this whole power dynamic with the narcissist.
Yeah, and I had, when you were saying about, the copying or the claiming, that was their work, I had a situation where I had a client whose boss would get them to do work above their pay grade. So it was the work that the boss should have been doing, but this individual was very competent and actually could produce better work and knew more than the boss. So the boss would then take their work and present it to their boss, as theirs. So what I suggested to the individual was that because the organization wasn't supportive, if you went to HR or whatever, it was an organization that was very narcissistic in itself. I said there will be good people in there who recognize that it is you doing the work, but what you could do is when you're sending it to your boss, try and copy somebody in, try and make it a more public focused task instead of letting the narcissist keep you undercover and just utilizing all your talent and claiming it as theirs. So I don't know what you would say in that regard.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you see it's unfortunate if you've got a culture in an organization that's a toxic culture. So it is very, very difficult. But yes, having a paper trail of that is very important. And I think you could also try to communicate your own role and say, these are the responsibilities of my role. And I do think that these other assignments or projects that you're asking me to do, they are actually the responsibility of somebody else. So maybe communicating that might be helpful too, because in those situations you can end up doing two jobs. You're
Mm.
doing your job and you're doing your boss's job as well, and then you're running yourself into the ground and you're getting absolutely um no positive feedback from that. So maybe trying even to bring it back if it becomes too much, go back to the boundaries and go back to kind of clear communication and expressing exactly what your role is,
Mm.
and may or may not be helpful, but that is a very, very
Mm.
challenging situation.
Yeah, very challenging. And sometimes it is better, I suppose, to if that person has a lot of power in the organization, and you're not going to be listened to on any level, to perhaps move within the organization or to look for another job. Although we can't keep doing that. So we do have to learn to a certain extent how to deal with the difficult person in the office.
Yeah.
Um
Yes. And I
but,
think it depends on it depends on what level they're at too as well. Like if they are above you, there
mm,
is that there's that power, the power that they have over you, which is much more challenging.
okay, have you come across the situation where you are a manager in an organization and you have a certain amount of people under you, maybe 4 to 6, and you have this person who you're trying to manage, but is always doing to a certain extent what you ask them to do, but maybe not fulfilling the task, like telling part of a truth, but not the whole truth. and they keep coming to you all the time, you know, being very agreeable, saying, of course I'll do that, but sucking energy out of you in relation to asking you inane questions, multiple questions about how you would like that done. In fact, being over helpful to the manager, but being a pain, you know, taking their time up with unnecessary detailed questions in a kind of a passive aggressive manner. Have you ever come across anything like that?
Mm. Yes, that's an interesting one. Yeah, kind of.
It's hard to actually pinpoint. They're doing the tasks you set out,
Yes.
but they're narcissistically taking a superior role, but they're being covertly passive aggressive in being
Yes.
overly nice about, I'm so cooperative, I couldn't be more cooperative. And
Yes.
they're trying to pin you down for the detail, and basically you'd be quicker doing the task yourself.
Yeah. Well, I think that oftentimes that is what people do, that they end up saying, I'll just take the task over myself, which is not effective and helpful. I think that in those instances, having reviews where you actually state in advance what you want to cover in the review and being very, very specific about it, and giving a certain time limit on the review that you're going to do with that person, um, is crucial. And then preparing yourself well and having the key questions that you want answered in that in that review. So clear, effective communication, and then writing everything down as well. And then I suppose when when you're communicating with them, it is about kind of that whole thing of kind of feeding back what they're saying too. So am I hearing you? Is this what you're actually saying? You know, to make sure that you understand what they're saying. And then once you do that, it's about being very specific about what you want from them. Have to
Yes.
be very, very specific. And it's got to be one step at a time, and it has to be agreed between you. But I think when you once you tune in to how they're saying they feel and what they need, and once you say what you feel and what you need, and you have an understanding of what they're trying to communicate, you can then be very specific about what you need. But it needs to be documented, and there needs to be a time limit on the amount of time you spend to do the review as well. But
Perfect.
yeah,
Yeah.
it can, that is a difficult conversation to have. And yeah,
Yeah.
not a nice one.
Yeah, that's not a nice one, because they're triggering you with their over helpfulness and their over niceness, while at the
Yes.
same time, you know, sucking energy out of you and actually enjoying it, getting some type of pleasure out of it. If they're a malignant narcissist or highly narcissistic, it is one approach that I have come across personally and found very trying. But I
And I
think,
think
yeah,
even from a personal perspective, when you're going into that kind of review with somebody like that, to prepare yourself well as well, so make sure that you're doing it at the time of the day when you're not really, you're not quite stressed out or overwhelmed yourself, so that um their capacity to trigger you would be higher. So pick a time to talk to them when you're feeling quite grounded and quite calm and quite prepared yourself. And don't let them send you off on on a tangent. Bring
yeah,
it back. Once you know in that review, once you know exactly where you want the direction of the conversation to go, have that goal in mind. This is what I want out of the conversation. And once you have that goal in mind, every time they try to take you somewhere else, just continually bring them back to the goal of the actual review.
Yeah, and I think in that situation, what you said about the documentation is crucial, Because what I often find is if they can't break you, say you're in middle management and they can't break you so that you're continually dealing with them as you should, they will then go above you if they can get anything on you at all, anything, the tiniest of mistakes or the tiniest of wrong things you might say that could be twisted, they'll go above your head, and then you'll have, you know, it coming down on you from that end, which is excruciatingly triggering, you know, if you know what you've been dealing with.
Yes.
So,
and I suppose the thing about it is, and it's very unfortunate that when you're dealing with these type of people, you have to be on your guard. You have to be on high alert. You have to be documenting everything. You have to have a procedure in place. You have to understand exactly what you want out of the reviews, and you have to remain strong, calm, communicate clearly. And it can be very, very wearing, but it's really, really important to be able to protect both yourself and your own professional standing in the organization, and then also the team that they could potentially be working with as well.
yeah, and your own mental health, definitely,
And your own
when
mental
you
health.
leave work, to
Yeah.
definitely try and leave behind. It's very difficult. I mean, I don't know if you found any situations yourself, but sometimes you'd be tormented in bed at night going over things, you know, when you've been triggered during the day in a work situation. It really does overtake your life, doesn't it? If you
Oh, it does. It does. It can. And I suppose what I'd say there is to try not to take it personally. And that's easier said than done. You know, when you leave work in the evening, have some way of releasing all of that tension of the day. And you know, sometimes you will find that people who've never had that experience before and may not be really good at putting in boundaries in their own life anyway,
yeah,
they can
yeah,
often go home from these kind of situations and feel really, really guilty for even for standing up for themselves. And I think in those moments we have to remember that we teach other people how to treat us. And the mind the mind can be fabulous, but the mind can also drive us completely insane. And if you're up at night and you're ruminating about it, and you're beginning to think that maybe it's something to do with you, a suggestion might be to do something like to journal about it, to get it out of your head. Because when you actually put the words, when you write down the words on a space, on a page, it actually gives the words space to breathe. And it is its own form of personal therapy. And also, another suggestion I would have would be when you're thinking about something that they might have done and you're wondering, are you imagining it or not? Or to write it down and to ask yourself, is it true? You know, can I actually believe it's true? You know, what are the facts of the situation? And once you can establish what that person has actually said, what that person is actually doing, then you can act that kind of self-sabotage and that insecurity and that guilt that you might be feeling yourself is dissipated, because these type of people have an incredible capacity to be able to make you think that it's your fault,
yeah,
that it's all to do with you, that it's,
yeah,
and they've been doing this all
yeah.
their lives, and they're expert at it. They're just so skilled at it. And so you have to become your own, almost like your own investigative journalist.
Yeah,
You've got
yeah,
to put your investigative journalist hat on, and you've got to ask yourself, okay, hold on a moment, what are the facts here? No, it's actually, they are the facts. This is actually nothing to do with me. These are things that this person has done to try to sabotage my professional standing in the organization.
yeah. Look at it objectively as opposed to personally. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, just one last question, and then if you wouldn't mind just giving details a little bit more about, what you do and the effect you've had by going into organizations, and contact details would be great if that's okay.
Oh.
So if somebody is starting a new job, and even if they've had the narcissistic experience in another workplace, so they're starting a new job, they're full of hope, and they want to not have that happen again, if possible. So they're going into an organization. How would they, or should they, could you give them tips on how to go into the organization and protect themselves as well as possible against jumping back into that kind of dynamic?
I think that it's really, really important that we learn to be able to communicate, to directly communicate how we feel and what we need in different circumstances. And people might think that you cannot bring your feelings or your needs into an organization, but the reality is that we're human beings, not human doers. And so you need to be able people around you need to be able to know who you are in all of your authenticity. So that's one thing I would say, is that if that's something that you find difficult to do, maybe think about doing some coaching to be able to learn how to communicate your feelings and your needs directly. Then the second thing would be boundaries. And boundaries, and direct communication are linked. To put those boundaries in place early on, to be able to say, I have this list of things to do. Which would you require me to do first if you're feeling overloaded? Or I'm really sorry, I can't do this at the moment. Being able to say no. When you're having encounters then with people that you find difficult, learning to communicate with them in such a way that you're focusing on their behavior and not on their personality. And then another thing would be to try not to take things personally, to understand that when other people are behaving badly around you, that it says more about them than it does about you.
Perfect. Okay. The other thing I was thinking was in relation to narcissists, usually if you go into a dynamic where there's a group of people, and this can even be like a hobby, where there's people, say, go walking together, or whatever group of people, if there is a narcissist in there under disguise, I would find it best to go into the group, be wary of people that come to you looking for personal close friendships very quickly. I don't know if you've found this one as well. But generally, a narcissist or a narcissistic individual will jump on the new person before that person has understood the politics in the group and the dynamics in the group, and will kind of take them under their wing to see what value that person could have for them, and to basically manipulate, because that person has no idea of the map of the dynamics between all the other people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so I think maybe step it back in the beginning and just watching behaviors and watching dynamics, etc., for a period of time early on when you join an organization will be very helpful. Because, yeah, that initial love bombing can be, very intoxicating. And especially if you're going into an organization where you don't know anybody else and you think that person is being really, really friendly, just be wary of the fact that those people are out there, and that if somebody is asking you too many personal questions and trying to get close to you too early on, that could be a red flag. So definitely something to watch out for.
Great. Well, between the two of us, and thank you very much for your in-depth experience, in the commercial sector and the workplace, because it is a kind of a niche within itself. So thank you.
Thank you.
Margot, can you just give a little rundown as to having you into an organization, maybe some differences that you would feel you would leave behind in the positive sense, and then your contact details if possible. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I work with business leaders in general. So I work in organizations, but I also work with entrepreneurs and business owners
Oh,
as well. And I run a program called the Regulated Leader, which is my own personal program. And it is 6 modules in total. And it's everything from building resilience to preventing burnout to learning mindset mastery, clarifying your leadership purpose, and then also conflict and collaboration as well. And I run trainings in organizations, one-to-one coaching and keynotes as well. And I also run this program in an online manner as well for business leaders and business owners. And I suppose what sets me apart maybe from other trainers in a similar space is that I use a lot of props and puppets in my
mm,
training. And I find it, well, first of all, it's quite entertaining to use them. And then secondly, it's a very, very effective way of being able to embed all of this learning to be able to use these prompts to, for example, demonstrate particular unhelpful thinking styles that we have, etc. So that's what I do. And my company is The Fox of Life. My website is www.thefoxoflife.com. And you can get me there, or you can send me an email, and it's Margot with a T at thefoxoflife.com.
thank you so much. So I would say that your sessions are actually learning through fun in some ways. That actually gets into our brains much more so with practical examples than just listening to what you should and shouldn't do. That sounds
Absolutely.
amazing.
Absolutely, yeah. And humor is such it's a benchmark for mental health, really. The more we laugh, the healthier we are mentally. So it serves a number of purposes.
And sometimes that's the only option with some of these difficult people. Listen,
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Just go home and have a good
yeah,
laugh.
yeah, because it is
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll bid you adieu and thanks just for taking part and for the information that you've provided. I'm sure it's going to help a lot of people.
Thank you very much, Paula, and best of luck with the channel. It's really, really important subject, and I know that you're helping an awful lot of people. So keep up the good work.
Thanks, Margot. Bye for now.
Thanks, Paula. Bye bye.
Bye.